your client needs to uh, pick her friends better in your world and in mine.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, that's a concept.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Everyday Woo, the place where we talk about the magical side of life with everyday people. I'm Amy from Cultivating Silence, and my guest today is Tim Sippola. Tim was my very first guest on the Everyday Woo, and I'm very happy that he has come back to be my very first returning guest on the Everyday Woo. Tim is a PhD psychologist of over 50 years, and I am a licensed clinical social worker, psychotherapist of over 20 years. And in private, Tim and I have had some discussions without identifying information. We have had some discussions of our clients who have come to us presenting anomalous, out of the box, quote unquote, woo experiences. And I've asked him to come on today so that we could actually have a public discussion about some of the things that people have presented to us that have been quote unquote woo experiences, with the idea being that not every woo experience brought in to a therapist's office by a client needs to be medicated.
Good.
Tim will share his thoughts. I will say here, I'm not against medication. I think there are times that it is valid and necessary, but not always. So, on that note, everyone, please join me in welcoming to the Everyday Woo, Tim Sippola. Hi, Tim. How are you today?
Fine, thanks. Good to see you again, Amy.
Nice to see you. So, I won't start today asking you your definition of the woo. We've already heard that in the first episode. But just if you have any general response to the introduction that I made, let's just start there.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think you brought up the topic clearly that I was wanting to discuss today. I think it's been very educational on my end of it. What exactly or how exactly woo experiences were initially perceived by me way back when. In fact, I'd like to talk about something that happened to me in 1980, which was my first year of practice, and it really altered the way I've practiced for the next 50 years. So
Oh,
I thought that would be a very important situation to discuss in terms of woo experiences on behalf of clients. And for me, it was a very impactful experience.
beautiful. I would love for you to share that experience, and maybe you decide, but maybe before you share that experience, could you share what was your mindset previous to that experience?
Well, I came out of a very, I guess you'd say, conservative background. I went to a high school where science was highly emphasized. I loved science, but the whole science paradigm in those days was based on if it's not measurable, we don't, it can't be real or we can't prove it's real. And there was a certain pride in looking at things from that perspective and kind of discounting or disregarding woo type experiences. And so I had, if you do watch that first interview, that was pretty early on, very early on, one of the experience, both of them. And they kind of loosened me up a bit. As I had mentioned, I at the time of those two experiences, I was an atheist, and I did not find that tenable from that point on. But I still regarded myself as a kind of classic physics-based person, and so I was still, while I didn't deny the experience of woo, if we want to keep calling it that.
You can call it something else. Absolutely. What would you like to call it?
Um, Probably more mystical.
Beautiful.
That seems to fit the best, but
Yes.
um, paranormal would be a more scientific
Mhm.
attempt to describe those experiences. But
Yes.
bottom line, this experience didn't happen until like 6 years after that, what had happened in that initial interview that I did with you.
This experience, meaning the one with the client that you're going to share with us, happened about 6 years after your personal experiences that you shared in the first episode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Um, yeah. So the what I'd like to describe happened in 1980, and it was my first year of practicing officially as a licensed psychologist. So that was paradigm shifting again for me. And I think that was an important experience, as I've said. So,
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, to have what you can look back on as a paradigm shift, that's a pretty important experience. So yes, please, thank you for setting it up. And please now share the experience.
okay. Well, another therapist on the staff asked, could I transfer this gal to you? And I said, sure. And, her diagnosis was schizophrenia. And I had worked with a number of schizophrenics when I worked at the VA. I worked at the VA for 4 years while I was in grad school. And so I didn't find it particularly intimidating, but I did think, oh boy, this is, hard to really help somebody that's schizophrenic. And so I accepted that, the transfer, but when she came in, she had just been released from the hospital, and she was really disturbed. It wasn't her first hospitalization, but in the first session, she just made it very clear that she never wanted to go back into the hospital again,
Mhm.
and that she wasn't really willing to take medication. And she had also been withdrawn from school in the eighth grade, living in a rural community. So her vocabulary was not extensive at all. But she was clearly brighter than her assessed intelligence. And oh, and I should say that my client also heard lots of what I would call very antagonistic, hostile voices. And she responded to them. I mean, they'd often tell her to quit coming to see me.
Wow.
They told her, throw yourself off this ladder. She was up picking pears in a tree and threw herself off the ladder and hurt herself. Uh, she would do all sorts of stuff that they would urge her to do, and they wouldn't let up until she did. And she felt very helpless about it. And I really wasn't very successful in helping her deal with that, short of medication, which she refused to go on. Okay. So the first time this ever happened to me, when she walked into my office, all I can describe it is I would say I saw this, I perceived this light around her, and I was like, what? You know, and I instantly understood I was supposed to work with her until she got better. And I was a bit unsettled by that. That had never happened to me before, and so, okay, so that's the setting.
Hmm?
Well, it turned out she was very traumatized as a child, very traumatized, but she had a neighbor, an elderly woman who happened to have been one of the first psychologists, female psychologists in the state where I live. And this woman was very kind to her
Beautiful.
and was a refuge, really, a source of great comfort and I would call healing, but on an ongoing basis, because whenever she would get traumatized, as soon as she could, she sought out this neighbor. And so that was also background for her. Well, I had been seeing her for 6 years, this, and it happened, I was giving an adult education course in the community. And after one of these classes, this woman came up to me, the elderly woman,
Client, the neighbor psychologist.
and she introduced herself to me. And so I did have that one chance to actually meet her face to face. And I'm going to call this woman Mary. And she seemed to be a very kind, gentle, soft-spoken person. And okay, so a month later, she died. And that was devastating to my client, understandably so.
And let me just ask again, this is after you had now been treating her for 6 years, you said? Okay, sorry, keep going.
So, for months, we were really trying to address the grief and that sort of thing. And one day, she was sitting across from me, uh, and I'd asked her some question. I don't have any recall of what that was, but my client just suddenly looked up, and she's very attentive looking, and suddenly she turns back to me and she says, Mary wants you to know, and she starts laying out this treatment plan. And she would pause, and she's using all this psychological jargon that nobody would expect her to understand the meaning of these terms and so forth. And I was just, I mean, I had to scrape my jaw off the floor. Because she would say, Mary wants me to say da 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 da. And then she'd stop after 20 seconds or so and she'd look back up and she'd listen again. And then she'd come out with the next portion of this treatment plan. And
Wow.
I was like just blown away. I didn't, I mean, my mind was reeling because I had always regarded these voices, when she was talking about Mary, I would think, well, she's just um, grieving, and this is a kind of a way that she's coping with her grief, and she's just, so, and I really thought of these voices as kind of representing childhood trauma experiences, and that was my kind of psychoanalytically based understanding. And So,
Meaning, perhaps an internal wound or part that is somehow informing her in the structure of a voice.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
So, uh, what was equally surprising was that this treatment plan was excellent, and it wasn't something I had come up with. And I could instantly see the beauty of it and the workability. And I'll just share one part of it. I mean,
Yes.
it was that your client needs to uh, pick her friends better in your world and in mine.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, that's a concept. It was absolutely true. I mean, my client was very vulnerable to people with less than good intentions. And, you'd expect that from a traumatic background like her. She's very vulnerable. So, but I never, well, for one, I didn't regard these voices as something to be taken literally as friends or enemies. Eventually, and my client came from a Christian background, and another aspect of the treatment plan was that she could relate to these hostile people and voices. Uh, these what I might call denizens of the other realm, where this Mary and they existed. She could relate to them from a distance and pray for them. And, at first I was like, okay, how am I going to sell praying for them to her? At least these negative voices. But and this was independent because this Mary would that was not the first time she came through. I mean, this went on for 2 years.
Wow.
And I learned to listen very attentively because I was getting schooled in how to deal with this brand of schizophrenia. It became clear to me that our understanding of schizophrenia is woefully lacking, or it was.
Well, I want to talk about that, but I want you to finish this story. But that's a great point.
Okay, the point I was making was about prayer, and I did suggest that to her, and almost instantly, I realized this is satisfying two needs on her part. She was a very generous, overly generous in many ways. The point she could be easily taken advantage of. But by praying for people, she did many acts of kindness in the community. And she was a very lovely person in many ways, just secretly tormented. And so uh, by praying for people, it really reduced her feelings of helplessness. You know, she actually had some reluctance to just outright reject these hostile beings, these voices. But the prayer really was an answer for her because she felt like she could do something good for them too, without rejecting them. But no, you stay in your world and, leave me alone. I'm going to pray for you right now. And when she would pray for them, they would vanish. So it gave her a real sense of empowerment without the whole kind of control issue. I mean, not that sort of power. Empowered, she felt, okay, I can do something effective here, even for those others. And so that also was a real eye opener for me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So,
Well, I want to just say something about that last part, if I may, real quick. The fact that she had this reluctance to reject the antagonistic voices. So here's this, maybe, if I can interpret, very loving being. She doesn't even want to reject the people that are telling her to jump off a ladder. But then when you introduce, well, you can pray for them, that resonates with her. And so correct my interpretations if I get this wrong.
got it right.
From a space of love, she's like, she gets on board. She's like, oh, I can do that. I can't yell at them and tell them to go away antagonistically, but I can pray for them. I can send them love. And when she does that, they vanish. This to me goes back to a theme that came out with Lori Zeltwanger in the last session, I always say session, the last interview, of talking about love as an antidote to basically heal everything. And here it is again in this example with your client. It's just amazing to me. It just pops up everywhere.
Yeah.
Would you like to share anything about that?
Um, yeah. I do think, I had made the point to her at early on, I think when she did some self-destructive act at their insistence, I said, they can't make you do anything. You have what they're doing is they're scaring you by withdrawing their support. This is interesting, and I did not catch on to this until later when I mean, PTSD, all the research on PTSD started coming out really after the Iraqi war. And but one of the results of that was that trauma-based personalities are often, it's the Stockholm Syndrome. They're they're abused, but then occasionally they're offered loving support.
Right. Yeah.
And so they keep going on that hope that, well, maybe if I do exactly what they say, then I'll be safe, then I'll be comforted, then I'll be treasured. And it was the same kind of thing going on at this other level of reality. And so, when I had said to her, they can't influence you except by scaring you into doing these things. We're gonna torment you forever. And she felt helpless. But the prayer was, that was the key. And that was an opportunity for her to just go with her strong point, which was despite this traumatic background, she was such a giving member of her community. Very humble, uh, just a wonderful person in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So, two things. Stockholm Syndrome and the in the other realm, they would abuse, let's say. But then I didn't hear you at any point, so I'm asking, did they then also offer her comforting?
It was more like they would leave her alone
I see.
and they would say, stuff like, we're glad you did that. That would be their level of comforting, or, uh,
Yeah.
now don't you feel better?
Wow.
And so it was that sort. I wouldn't really call it comforting,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
That was
There was relief from the quote unquote
torment.
torment. Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to you mentioned working with this woman. You were schooled in working with this brand of schizophrenia. So I want you to talk about this brand as well as our understanding of schizophrenia, at least then, was woefully lacking. So maybe, if it's, actually improved since then, those are two very large questions. So I can ask them again if you need me to.
Well, basically, schizophrenia was seen as loosened ties with reality, either in the form of hallucinations or delusions or both. And her perception of these voices would have been considered a hallucination. She's seeing and or hearing something that nobody else can. And I should say I never heard Mary. I never did,
Hmm?
but by the information she was conveying, it was clear to me this is not because she would stumble as she was trying to repeat these words that she was not familiar with. And so it was clear that that level of education, that level of vocabulary was not within the scope of my client's background. So those were hallucinations by definition, but they I couldn't regard them as hallucinations in a classic sense. And
What do you mean by that in a classic sense?
well, that people are perceiving stuff. I mean, the light bulb is telling me I need to do X, Y, Z. That would be what I would have considered, but it's not a whole lot. I mean, it made me question like what are hallucinations really? And later it came out that they were doing research on psychics. They were doing brain research, looking at what parts of the brain are activated during psychic experiences and during schizophrenia.
Beautiful.
And the psychic center lights up in both, but in psychics, the frontal lobes are also active. This is where you're judging, you're assessing, are other people going to see a schizophrenic might hear a voice and think everybody else, just assume everybody else does. And that's how they end up getting, in trouble, really.
They think they're in a shared reality and they're not.
They're not. Yeah, they've actually got this foot in another level of reality that we don't really, at least at that time, we did not regard as quote unquote real in any sense. So it was really expanding my view of, and you could say it expanded my consciousness of, maybe I don't need to just take into consideration this normal waking state of reality. I need to be willing to address the possibility there's these other levels of reality. And that would include even ETs, extraterrestrials, which came later, but anyway, it really was consciousness expanding. And I was forever influenced by that, that's for sure. Um, I would really try to understand people who were reporting woo experiences from this more expanded perspective. It just made me open.
I personally think that it is really important to have this kind of an open mind. And here, this one of your first clients, I think, from the go, just opened you up. So I imagine you have had very few, and I'm asking you to talk about this, of course, very few clients for whom you have said, hey, I think you do need medication. Go over to Bob and he'll prescribe something. I mean, has that happened? Have you had those clients, or do you err on the side of caution, let's say?
Well, I I don't actively discourage people from using meds.
Mhm.
Uh, I do often, maybe to the extent of saying usually, suggest it may be possible for you to function well without the side effects you're experiencing and still get the results you'd like to have with the medication. So, and a lot of times people are interested in not using meds because of the side effects, or they just don't find them useful.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. That's a lovely way to talk about it with a client. That's beautiful. Yeah. So that takes me, um, again, my brain is going in two different directions. It was something about our understanding of schizophrenia.
Oh yeah.
And but it was more than that. It was
And
the
this
definitions of, sorry, you go ahead. What were you going to say?
the second part, the psychotic or the loosened ties with reality was one of the main criteria. The other was impaired childhood relationships. And while that was true within her family, it really wasn't true. She did attach to older people, not just this neighbor, but others in the community. And those are the people she was really focusing on in terms of these generous efforts to relate to them and be helpful. She would do volunteer work basically. And so I did, I mean, right from the start, I was questioning, I don't see this impaired relationship.
Mhm.
The classic schizophrenic, really, you can't hardly have a relationship with them. Although I later kind of questioned that too, because at the VA where I was, they were all so heavily medicated that they were like walking zombies. And so, yeah, so.
Do you believe that, let's say, some of those people had they had the opportunity to work with someone like you and come off of their medication, what do you think would have happened?
I don't know, but I certainly thought, it's worth looking at the possibility.
Yeah.
And you don't know. I
Mhm.
mean, since then, there's a book called Unshrunk by Laura Delano. Oh, good. And
I was
in
just going to go there, so go ahead.
oh, good. So, she does a great job of describing her own experience. She's not anti-medication either, but she had a pretty horrific experience as a young teenager through her late 20s with medication, and then there'd be a side effect, and then another medication to address the side effect, and she ended up being on different several meds that really detached her from her capacity to experience her own emotions. And really, I think you'd agree that the capacity to experience our emotions, to actually know what's going on for us physically and understand them cognitively, is a really critical part of the healing process. And the way this Laura Delano explains her experience, it just numbed her out to her feelings and made it very, very difficult, if not impossible, to track what was going on for herself emotionally.
Yeah, she talks about I think she was hospitalized 4 times and tried to suicide one time, I believe. Um, and she talks about the difference. Well, she talks about like what she called, well, it is a term, psychiatric iatrogenesis. So, the injury being caused by the treatment itself and or by the doctor. And, I think that's a very real thing in this world. Again, not that medication is never valid, but so many people are in a loop of taking a medication and having the side effects and whatever that medication is doing, then a doctor puts them, let's say, on another medication to deal with that side effect, and so on and so forth. And then you're on many medications, and the treatment itself is causing you to spiral downward. Um, and that was, I believe, as you're sharing, some or most of her experience. So I don't know what to say about that. Do you have any, it's heartbreaking. I think just talking about it as a real thing is important to make people aware that, well, okay, maybe I don't have to be on this medication. Don't come off of it right away, anybody. Do it, with a professional if you're going to try. Don't do it alone. But I don't know. What do you have to say about this cycle that our current culture seems to be in?
Oh, really, I mean I see a split really in our culture. On the one side, it's like medications are going to be the answer. And the trouble with certain medications is that they themselves impair our connection our with others, uh, and they impair our cognition. Some of them are horrible in that way. And so it's almost like they're inducing the original criteria to diagnose schizophrenia. I mean, they don't take it that far usually, but some people end up hallucinating from taking meds. They have psychotic breaks. Um,
Become suicidal from taking meds
pardon?
and become suicidal from taking
Yeah.
meds in some cases.
Yeah. So I'm very cautious about that avenue of treatment.
Yeah.
Um, and the other is really, can we expand the person's consciousness? Because a lot of people are suffering from what I still classically call repression. They're trying to block out I don't ever want to feel that feeling again. I'm not willing to go there. And they're reacting as if their own emotions are a source of real danger to them. Yes, if to experience a past hurt, it's unpleasant. Of course it is. And uh, yet the willingness to face it, I think in repression, what happens is that people try to stop the experience as it's happening. And there was an article I read one time called Repression, the Unexperienced Experience. And it was referring to, how people try to block out an unpleasantness that's occurring due to some circumstance that is traumatizing in one way or another. But then that tension that they build up, that dulls their awareness because tense muscles are dense muscles, and they don't allow for the transmission of sensation as effectively. That's why we brace our arm and tense it up if we see a strike coming. And so when people do tense up to fight their feelings, they don't realize that all feelings come from caring. And, even the unpleasant feelings are trying to alert us to the fact something's wrong with something that matters to us. And when they cut themselves off from that unpleasantness, they're also cutting themselves off to some degree or another from their ability to care or their own consciousness to care for them, by alerting them, oh, something's wrong here, address it. And then people get into this negative loop. It's actually called a positive loop where they're afraid of their own feelings. And then when some symptom, physical sensation comes up, I see this in panic attacks a lot. People start panicking about, oh, my fingers are tingling, or, oh, my heart rate's increased. And what if they just ran up the stairs, or uh, so anyway, repression ends up creating this loop, somewhat like medication does. The side effects. Oh, now we need to give another med for the side effect. Well, oh, I'm scared to have a panic attack. Oh, is this a panic attack starting? Uh-oh, I better. Uh, yeah. So it just, in both cases, it's this loop that just perpetuates the problem. And it's going the other direction where you expand your consciousness, which is what happened with my client that I was describing earlier. I suddenly was like, oh, well, here's a much bigger arena for me to act in. I just saw it as, okay, I can deal with normal waking reality and I can deal with this realm. Yeah, you need to pick your friends better here too. And, this Mary is a good friend. Are these the kind of friends you want to hang out with? And I actually was working with her on both levels, the people in her waking reality and on that level. And so that was successful. Yeah, but see, that's an example of not reducing your consciousness with meds or repression or distraction or addiction or, there's all sorts of ways people try to keep their uh, consciousness restricted. And I think the answer is actually in the other direction.
That's so beautiful, Tim. Thank you for all of that, for sharing that. Yeah, and it's, I've experienced it over and over again when people allow themselves to feel, especially the deeply challenging feelings that they have compartmentalized or suppressed or repressed. When I'll finish the sentence, and then when they allow themselves to feel that, they begin to open, and their consciousness and their clairsenses begin to expand. It's amazing and fascinating to me. And the other thought that I had was it takes me back again to the last episode with Lori Zeltwanger. Um, I kept saying over and over again how Lori provides such a safe, warm, loving environment. And so the client, and I have been her client, the client begins before you even get on a table for a myofascial session, the client begins to deeply relax, and you breathe deeper, your muscles relax, you begin to feel safe. You are in an environment of love and safety, and in that space you allow yourself to feel the things, whether it's physical constriction or emotional fear of pain or something that's blocked off. You begin to allow yourself to open up, and things begin to flow. And so the fascia begins to warm and become unfrozen. And with that, your emotions begin to flow. So I said it in that episode. I think that work, that physical work, is very akin to the work that you and I do. It's basically, I think, the same process. One is physical and one is emotional.
Parallel.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we're closing in on our time, but I do want to just ask, you gave this beautiful experience with one client. I'm sure you have other woo experiences with other clients. Is there any other story that you would like to share before we wrap up today?
Well, um, actually, there's a bunch of others, but there's a different side to this experience that I was describing. It turned out that my client was quite psychic,
Yes.
and way beyond what was going on with Mary. Uh, and, I think it's really important. And again, this happened in my first year and a half of working with this woman. It's important to create an atmosphere of safety. But I had to learn a really important lesson, and she was the one that taught me. Because what would happen is, I told her I would do my best to keep her out of the hospital, and she would call me in the middle of the night. I mean, like 2:30 in the morning, and this would happen 3 or 4 times a week.
Wow.
She didn't call me earlier. She would call me at like between 2:30 and 4, and
Mm.
she'd be saying, I'm thinking of killing myself. And I'm like, oh boy. I wanted to preserve the trust because I told her I would try and keep her out of the hospital. But I also wanted my sleep. And, she was not responsive to, could you wait till morning or could you call me earlier? And so, and if I said, the first thing out of her mouth was, I'm thinking of killing myself. The second thing was, don't be mad. I don't want you to be mad at me. And I would say, let's call her Jane, you know, uh, Jane, I'm not mad. Because if I said it was mad, it would trigger her, from her childhood traumas. And so this went on and I'm thinking, oh, it's good for me to say I'm not mad. But one night, and this took like a year and a half, and then we get into an argument. She'd say, "You are mad," and I'd say, "No, I'm not." And then eventually I'd say, "Well, I'm starting to get mad because you keep telling me I'm mad when I'm not." Well, rule number one on my internship was don't argue with a client. And so, I'm catching on to that. But this one night she says, "You're mad." And I said, instead of saying, "No, I'm not," I'd say, "Yeah, you're probably right." Because I realized she was picking up, she, she,
She,
yeah, she knew. And, despite my best efforts to be kind and comforting and say, yeah. So, I really learned that I just had to learn to be more real with my own feelings, that it just wasn't a good thing to lie. Even white lies, which I found fascinating from childhood on.
so that's interesting. Yeah. Well, that brings to mind two very quick things, if I may. I have become, hopefully, I believe, a good therapist because of everything that I've learned from my clients. and here you are. Thank you for sharing. That's kind of a vulnerable story. I don't think many therapists would admit to that. And, we as therapists, I think if you are worth your salt at all, you learn from every client that comes in the door. So that's just beautiful. And the last thing, I just wanted to say, I've had a few clients along the way, one very specific, um, a few clients who I believe were somewhat psychic. One was pretty powerfully psychic. And every time she sat down in my office, I would get visual hits like right here. Like I eventually learned how to work with them in a different way, but at this time part in my life, they were appearing above my head. And I would share them with her, and they were always relevant to what she was working on. And I truly believe that she helped to expand my psychic abilities. And it reminds me, the reason I'm sharing all of this, it reminds me of, when she first walked in your office and you saw that light and you knew, oh, I'm supposed to work with her. I think part of the reason that came to you is because of her psychic abilities.
I never considered that. Great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
isn't it just beautiful the way, if we're in a state of love and hopefully somewhat trust, that we can really enhance each other and help ourselves open, whether, like I said before, whether it's the physical type work or the emotional, heart-centered, you know, work that I believe you and I are doing. It's just a beautiful thing.
I totally agree. Very fulfilling, very rewarding.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for taking this journey of hopefully sharing a little bit of what is not too often talked about, and bringing it out into the public, to hopefully, again, as always with this show, trying to normalize things that can seem a little bit scary or a little bit woo-woo, and hopefully helping people feel a little more grounded when they're going through some of this stuff.
Great. Yeah. Your idea for this show is wonderful. I'm really grateful to you for doing this. It's quite a venue for normalization of expansion of consciousness, really. It
Yeah,
really is that.
I agree. Thank you again, Tim, for doing this today. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we will see you next time on the Everyday Woo. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks.